Well, I wanted to make a video addressing kind of a side topic that came up. I was talking to somebody, and the question of fire departments, actually, a subscriber sent me a message asking about how fire protection would work in a free market economy. And, you know, in my response, which I'm not even sure if I actually got around to sending to him, I was listening. It seems very unlikely that a normal person would not take precautions against fire damage that would statistically make it relatively uncommon. So the argument goes, if you own a house or you own a business or you're loaning money to somebody who is buying a house with that money or a business, then you have no interest in that property being destroyed by fire, and so you would institute to protect your investment, basic uh, basic fail safes or protective measures to prevent that from happening. And that wouldn't be a guarantee that it could never happen, but it would make the odds that it would happen relatively small. And the same of this could be said even for regular property. If you owned a lot of land and you were concerned about fire safety, there are steps you can take. Of course, these vary by circumstance quite a bit. Obviously, if you own a bit of swampland or if you seastead, it's not as vital as if you own many acres of prairie land that's very dry and arid. But in any case you can think of, there's steps you can take. But I think an objection that would come up when I was formulating my responses, yes, that's all well and good if we're talking about normal people who are high functioning enough to anticipate the future, anticipate potential problems, and then to have the time preference, a low enough time preference to set aside resources in the present, say through a sprinkler system or through fire insurance or whatever else, smoke detectors, to take care of fire. And so the objection that because it's clear that most people would have the capacity to take measures, and even if they don't have the expertise, because very few people are experts at fire prevention, thanks to the division of labor, thanks to the diffusion of knowledge, thanks to mutual exchange, it is easy to come by that information. You could either the most expensive thing you could probably do is hire somebody and say, I'm not an expert in this, what is your advice? You could just, at this point in time, just look it up on the internet. You could maybe buy a book. Maybe you could take a class. You know, that information is available. But the objection is, well, what about somebody who is just their time preference is too high. They don't have enough foresight. Essentially, what if somebody is too stupid? Then what happens? Now, it's a valid point because I think we can all agree that there are people who are too stupid. Now, that kind of begs the question, though. I like hypothetical scenarios, but they're not really valid in terms of critique unless you apply them consistently. So, and when we're talking about theoretical societies, and I don't see this when people debate, like when socialists propose socialism and conservatives debate them, I don't see conservatives drawing logical conclusions about what a socialist society would imply and then ask hypothetical questions based on that. It's mostly emotionally charged. But with libertarians, there's always these, well, what if? And usually, these are pretty poor because they would apply equally to any society we're talking about. So if we're going to talk about healthcare, people object to free market healthcare and they say, well, this all sounds well and good. It would be cheaper and there would be better incentives and there would be a higher quality and there wouldn't be all this government money bidding up the price. But what if you're in the middle of the wilderness and you have a suddenly extremely fatal brain aneurysm and you're completely alone and it's in Libertopia? Wouldn't you probably die in that situation? And the answer is, yeah, you probably would. But if we were to have a socialist or a state system or a current system and you were to have a brain aneurysm in the middle of some isolated patch of forest, you would be screwed as well. And so the the scenario is not particularly viable. It doesn't demonstrate the weakness or the strength of a given system, because it's a test that no system could really pass. Or here's another one, maybe a little bit less hyperbolic, pertaining to defense. The argument is, well, what if your free country, your Commonwealth, or your Ancapistan, or whatever you want to call it, is suddenly attacked by a vastly more powerful, vastly larger, more populous, determined state, that has 100 times the population and 20 times the wealth, and their government is just determined to attack and assault you. Are you going to be able to turn them away with Ancapistan? And although we could elaborate the circumstances ad nauseum and say, well, maybe there's an ocean, or maybe there's what if a hurricane happened during the invasion? But I don't think that's necessary, because we could say, well, let's just say we don't have Ancapistan. Let's say we have a minarchist state or a socialist state, and the aggressor state is similarly powerful in relative terms. Is there any indication that a state in that situation could plausibly defeat an assailant under those conditions, with those qualifications? Now, if you're going to change it and say, well, if a state attacks another state, let's assume that they have equal size and that they have equal wealth and they have equal technology. Okay, well, that's a different scenario, and I think that you see this a lot. I kind of call it the "what if the sun explodes" hypothetical. What would anarcho-capitalism do if the sun explodes? It would have nothing that it could do. And the same with any other political system you might add or name. And most of the refutations of anarcho-capitalism, I think, commit this fallacy, although I couldn't tell you for sure what the name of this fallacy is. But to address the one with stupid people, and I think that's just kind of the most generic term I can think about it, there's an objection. Look, some people just can't take care of themselves. And let me elaborate on what exactly I mean by that. For one thing, there is something that I consider the quote-unquote worthy poor. These are people who physically cannot meet their own needs. There is no way in any society that they would be capable of their own volition, and this might be because they don't have volition, to provide for themselves. So if we were living in a hunter-gatherer society, these people would be totally dependent on others, either their peer group, their clan, whatever, to provide for them. If we were living in a socialist system, these people would be totally dependent on whatever systems exist on their survival. If we're living in a capitalist system, so on. These are people who, for whatever reason, are physically or mentally incapacitated, or both, to the point where there is, they're not volitional, they're totally physically incapable. And in the readings I've read about charity, there's a term, a specified term used for this group, at least in the old days in the United States, and that's the worthy poor. People who, through no fault of their own, especially that's key, are incapable of providing for themselves. So there's them, and some of those people are stupid. But then there's other people who they're not very smart. They don't have. They typically have very high time preference. So they're very unlikely to invest in things like a sprinkler or fire insurance or auto insurance or life insurance or any kind of insurance, because they need all that money in the here and now, and traditionally they need it in the here and now so they can get drunk or take some other drug or satisfy some other want. Maybe they're gamblers, maybe they like hookers, maybe they just have such a high time preference that they can't hold down a job. That's the other thing, is if your high time preference is high enough, going to work, whatever the labor is, even if you're working for yourself, it doesn't make as much sense as engaging in leisure. And of course, if you always and only ever engage in leisure, it's very unlikely that you will have much in the term, much to trade. You won't have much to engage in mutual exchange with others, and so you will be left to whatever it is you're able to produce on your own. And since you value leisure so much, that won't be very much. You'll be very poor. Now, as libertarians, we tend to, I know this is my tendency, maybe this isn't everyone's tendency, but there's a tendency to think of lots of people as being stupid. And I think that when it comes to abstract ideas about like political ideology, about economics, about philosophy, about ethics, these are all relatively abstract concepts, however important they are. And I think it's true that the vast majority of people don't expend very much mental effort in hashing these ideas out. Even people with fairly strong political philosophies tend to not have rigorous ones. Um, they have several positions that they're very emotional about. They hold those positions, and then whatever connects the dots, so to speak, in that thinking is their political ideology. And I know, though I'm not an objectivist, there was a great line in Philosophy Who Needs It by Ayn Rand where she said, most people's philosophy is just a random hodgepodge. And I extend that to not just mean philosophy, but just their political thinking. When you're talking about abstract things, people tend to be morons. But that doesn't mean they're morons in everything else. The same people who are very, very, flippant and haphazard and inconsistent when we're talking about, say, rights or taxation or property or whatever, are much more rational and much more logical, empirical when it comes to more concrete things that bear directly on their lives. So how their car works, how their house works, or whatever's going on with their job, if they have a particular task in mind that they're trying to achieve, they can be as innovative as anybody else. And I think that this is very much a reflection of opportunity cost and of rational ignorance. In a lot of ways, I consider politics to be something like meteorology or the study of clouds. You can go online and you can read about the various types of clouds: cumulus, cirrus. I can't even think of that many more. But what's really the point? Knowing that information doesn't give you hardly any effect on what kind of clouds you're going to see, how they're going to behave. It doesn't give you much in terms of predicting what they're going to do, and even if you could, you again couldn't influence it. So why are you spending time learning about them? You could be spending that time for something else. There's an opportunity cost there, if not an actual financial one. And so it doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense. And I think in a lot of ways government and politics in general is similar to clouds. Yes, it maybe affects you, but it's something that goes on that you are unlikely to have much influence on. Whether you vote, whether you don't vote, whether you're vocal or politically active in some specific sense, you don't have a lot of influence over it. So to really examine issues, candidates, that sort of thing, there's not a lot of reward in that. And so it's probably better to spend your time planning your next vacation, deciding what you want to eat, deciding whether you should pay for a gym membership or not, judging who you're going to marry, who you're going to date, what movies you want to see this weekend, what shows you're going to watch, what books you're going to read. All that really, since you have not infinitely but many orders of magnitude more influence over it, it makes much more sense to devote your mental energies in that. So I don't think most people are lacking in mental energy. I think that most people are just making a rational choice. However, when government becomes more threatening or more apt to cause us physical damage in one way or another, either to ourselves or to our property, if it looks like it's going to endanger our plans, a process known as regime uncertainty, then becomes there's more incentive then to look into it. I think the best illustration of this that I can think of in contemporary, although it's becoming continuously less contemporary, is the crash in 2008. I know many people personally and just anecdotally through the internet who were, they tended to be conservatives but not universally, very basically uninterested in politics, uninterested in political philosophy, uninterested in actually completely unaware of libertarianism, Austrian economics, all that stuff. And that the crash in 2008 was something that jarred them out of apathy, because they either lost money, which is mostly true with people who were older. Most of the people my age at that point would have been in college or just out of college and probably not had tons of investments that were, denuded in that event, but saw that it was something that affected older people and became, hey, what happened here? There suddenly became, this is something that's physically potentially a threat, and it behooves me to understand this. And many people that I know came down that path. An examination of the crash in 2008, and not an insignificant number of people who look into that, especially those who are coming from a clean slate or a relatively clean slate without previous political biases, tend to fall into the Peter Schiff, Ron Paul, Austro-libertarianism. Not that everybody who looks into it comes to that conclusion or even finds that path, but it's very common. I think the reason why that happens is because the cost-benefit analysis calculation of that information has changed. That equation is not the same when you stand something to lose. And this is how I rationalize, if that's, I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, how I rationalize my interest in the state and economics. I think of the state as something that is potentially extraordinarily dangerous, and not just to my person, but to my property. And so it makes sense for me to be as versed as I possibly can be in its potential actions, without any implication that I can predict what it's going to do. I like to say I have a pretty good idea of what it's capable of doing and what it's likely to do, and not to assume some myth about how it's going to behave. And that's a a great calamity I see for a lot of people, is they are thinking, they have the impression that this or that problem in their lives will be taken care of by the government, whether it's their health care, whether it's their retirement. I think retirement's one where people just kind of assume, Social Security will take care of that. There may be people who receive their Social Security checks, but I think that is extremely risky. That is putting your faith in a capricious organization that has no, as a it's not just, people call it a monopoly. That really doesn't do it justice. It's a monopoly on numerous services, not least of which are arbitration, law, order, not really defense, but that has a vast military apparatus around it anyway. Even if it's not the sole defender, it doesn't really defend people. But an organization like that is not one to be trusted with your livelihood. And so it makes sense to be as divorced from it as possible, to be as independent from it as possible. Now, the objection, and this, wow, this is a tangent, but whatever, that's how I do it, I guess. People who are not intelligent, and I don't mean in the political abstract sense, but I mean they are not able to look after their own affairs in a very effective way. I don't think that that's a very good refutation of a libertarian society, because let's just say, to use the original example, that they don't buy they don't buy fire insurance, they don't buy sprinklers, they don't buy fire extinguishers, they don't take the time to learn what it would take. They value their house, obviously, but they're too dense to have recognized the potential that it could be destroyed. Their time preference is too high, to the point where they would never put money aside for a future calamity. They are always going to consume everything they produce, and they're not going to consume it with fire alarms and fire extinguishers. They're going to consume it as meth or booze or lottery tickets, or whatever other things distract them, or maybe it's something else. Maybe they collect Ming vases or something, but whatever. So the argument is, well, then the government has a place in their case. The government can come and it can dictate to them that they must have these things, and it will force them on. It will have some measure of enforcement, however unwieldy and inefficient, to force them, for their own good, quote unquote, to have fire protection. I don't find this particularly convincing, because if someone is really that moronic, this is the hypothetical situation. I don't think most people are like this. I think we're talking about maybe a percentage point or less. Depends, I guess, how you want to divide it. But those people are in really big trouble no matter what society we map out. So even if you have a nanny state that is passing legislation, ordinances, and attempting to enforce them even rigorously, people who are that stupid are in real serious trouble. Of their own lives, and these are the people who die in accidents. These are the people who fall off ladders, who die in car accidents. Um, they're weaned out by the evolutionary process, more or less. Less so now than in the past, but it still happens. These are the people who win Darwin Awards. And even if they don't die, even if it's not anything that dramatic, they live lives that are probably going to be relatively pitiful by the subjective preferences of most other members of society. Let's just say that. Um, even if they never die, even if their house never burns down, there are always going to be people in society, whether we have a socialist society, a capitalist society, or a minarchist society, who will look at these people and say, look, these people have problems. And at some point you have to realize that can't be the fault of the system that surrounds them. There are people who are just going to have problems, and maybe it's, we could debate how much of that is nature, how much of that is nurture. It's also basically irrelevant. Unless you make the real strong argument that some degree of nurture could make that impossible, and I don't think that's the case. Even if nurture is the primary reason, I don't think that you can have enough knowledge to have enough control to demonstrably, prevent that from happening. Even if you put people in laboratory conditions, I don't know if that level of control is possible. And a society where individuals are placed in laboratory conditions, at least to the point where they're not developing that much any longer, which people can develop forever. But let's just say through childhood or early childhood, I don't know. There's a few people in the world who advocate that, but not most. Even most socialists don't advocate that. Some TVPers will, but other than that, I don't really hear it from anyone. These people are going to be in serious trouble, whether or not there's an FDA or an ATF or Department of Education or some bureau that makes sure that credit card companies aren't charging too much money. These people are in trouble. But government intervention on their behalf raises other concerns for, especially interesting questions in a democratic society, because the use in the hypothetical situation is that these people are too inept to take care of themselves, hence the state. But if this is a democratic state, this begs the question, then, are these people voting? Because the premise of the situation is that they're not capable of taking care of themselves, and yet if we're talking about a democratic state, which is the de facto state of almost all states at this point, one degree or another of a democratic state, even the people who favor like constitutional monarchy still believe in voting and all that. Like, what is their concept then of these people? So they're too, they function so poorly that they can't take care of themselves, but they can vote, should vote, and this raises other, if obviously if they can't take care of themselves, why should they have a say in taking care of others, let alone themselves? So what's the relationship between these people who are the basis of this objection? We're saying, hey, libertarian society won't work because of these people, so democratic society will work, but how does democratic society cope with these people? Are they going to ignore them? Are they going to say, okay, you are basically wards of the state, state will take care of you, but you don't have any role in the state, you can't vote, you're basically just a pawn. That goes against all the egalitarian democratic rhetoric that people love so much, but the alternative is we want morons to be having an effect on how we're governed. People who have time preference that is that high, that can't make good decisions about immediate practical terms, that have high costs if they make the wrong decisions through their personal lives. The idea that they're going to then be able to make good decisions about relatively abstract ideas that are difficult for people to grasp at all, let alone come to informed opinions about, is hopeless. There's no reason to assume that or to think that's ever going to be the case. So I mean, how do these people, like this saying, I'm stupid and I vote, how are they, you're polluting the system. You know, the institution that's supposed to be responsible, be the responsible institution that's going to compensate for these people's lackluster mental abilities, is polluted by those very people. The electoral process is receiving input, however marginal, from these people. And the thing with large elections especially is the marginal votes are actually the ones who swing it. You know, you're going to have 48 one way, 48 another way, and it's that 2% who swing, and that's what decides the election. You know, hypothetically, there's many situations that wouldn't actually be the case, but in the long count of elections, that's what matters. And the moronic class is going to swing the election at least some of the time. And you know, then we have, well, how is the government going to be responsible when it has the morons voting for it? That's another question. And then what is the moral and ethical? And again, I'm not the most, I don't like moral arguments as much as I like them, but I don't feel comfortable relying on them. Let me just say that. There's a whole host of ethical questions when we start talking about the state being the guardian or the parent, or having you know, people be the ward of the state. I've actually known that. I mean, I grew up in a house that did foster care, and the foster brothers and sisters, although I think that's not an appropriate term for the way I felt about them. You know, they were wards of the court, so to speak, which legally just meant that the state was the state. In my case, the state of Michigan was their parent. You know, their actual biological parents or adoptive parents in a few cases had lost custody, taken away by the state. The state basically gave itself custody of these children. Now, typically the state would make an effort of passing them off to somebody else, some relative. But if the state decided that there wasn't a relative, and sometimes there literally wasn't one, or if it just decided the ones who were available didn't meet its criteria of what was good enough, the state would become the parent. The state bureaucracy would determine that in a totally incoherent and capricious manner, by the way. You know, they're becoming the parent, and they're basing that off of, in some cases, just a couple minutes of testimony from one or two witnesses who are anything but experts in the case. Be that as may. You know, the relationship they have with these people is not a democratic one. It's a paternalistic, hierarchical one. It's a relationship of we decide and you do. You live with it. You don't decide. You don't vote. You don't tell the government how to do. Now, this is contrary to almost all the democratic rhetoric that you hear about, like egalitarianism. You have to vote. And I don't see how this really kind of squares, how you can square this circle, so to speak. The other problem is, what about people who aren't retarded, who aren't stupid? Where is the moral obligation for them in this situation? If resources are being redistributed to stupid people by the state, what is the basis for asserting, as this scenario implies, that others are obligated to pay taxes for that? Again, I'm not Mr. Ethics or Morality. I like ethics and morality. I will argue that way, but I don't like to lean on it. But what is the basis for making that demand on others? And of course, whatever that basis is, the incentives that it creates are obvious, and they're not very good. For one, the number of people then who could be passed off into this worthy poor, worthy idiot, useful idiot class suddenly becomes much larger. If being stupid means that you are going to live in absolute destitution for your whole life, maybe even have a very short, brutal life, then the only people who are actually going to be there are those who are in that position. If, however, that classification is a ticket to government welfare, and if that's, and it depends how much, though. I mean, if the government says all we're going to do is we're going to drop off, you know, 20 cords of firewood at your address once a winter, okay, probably not many people are going to be induced. But if they start to say, okay, well, We'll take care of your housing. We'll take care of your food. We'll take care of your medical bills. And these are the common needs, the most basic things that many people within the society today are already getting, B, demanding, and C, projecting as more or less rights. Then the number of people who are willing to cast themselves in this light or be cast in this light grows immensely. Hans Hermann Hoppe always says, if you subsidize an activity, you'll get more of it. And I don't know anybody who can argue with that. If you're going to pay people because they're stupid or incapable or on welfare for any other reason, you're going to have more people who choose to do that. And it's not always going to be a conscious choice. It's not always going to be people who cynically are saying, I'm going to game the system to get money for nothing even though I'm fully capable. You know, many of them might sincerely think that that's where they belong, but they are more apt to make that decision if they think that they're going to gain an awful lot by it, as opposed to they're going to be destitute. The kind of retort to all this, basically there has to be an awful lot of skepticism of who is a worthy poor and who is not, and to basically refrain as much as possible from especially monetary help to people who are not worthy, people who could work, people who could actually earn a living. And I know the refrain here is that's harsh, that's cruel. Being stingy with people in need is what it sounds like, but that's not really the case. Any serious analysis of the poor and poverty is that the incentive caused by there being money available is one of the chief largest causes of poverty. Usually the worst causes are things like intemperance, and I mean that generally, not just for alcohol but for everything. And again, I'm not going to come out and say we should have prohibition. You know, that's definitely a case of a cure being worse than a disease. But the next one is money being available. That is a huge incentive for people. They could A, work and earn a little bit of money, or B, do no work and make a little bit of money, or even a lot of money in some cases. Now, the state has proven itself completely unable to make the distinction between the worthy and the unworthy poor. One of the most basic reasons is bureaucracy. I don't think states are always literally looking at the poor as votes that they're buying. And even at one point, you know, there wasn't universal suffrage, and they weren't, because a lot of the people who were poor were not eligible to vote. But the bureaucracy is such that it's very hard for them to make assessments like that. It's very hard for even diligent people to make those assessments. You know, somebody can appear that they are unable to work when really they're putting on an act, and how can you tell? And other people might appear to be capable of work and actually not be. You know, someone can be physically able but so mentally scarred or mentally unable that, you know, if you tried to make them work, they just can't do it. The state has, even when it tries, a hard time doing this. But then you get into the period where they're not really even trying to discern, and that's the case now. There was kind of a shift. One of the many shifts that took place in welfare in the United States was basically during the 60s, the late 50s into the 60s. There was a shift where from receiving pauper wages, receiving welfare was considered insulting and degrading and a sign of failure, to this is your right and you're entitled to this. And if people don't give it to you, if you're not given this, then that is a mark against the people who are refusing to give it to you. They're being stingy. They're being greedy. They're being greedy for not giving you money. And that mentality hasn't swept everywhere. There's still people who consider welfare to be bad. There's a very strong urban-rural divide where many people in rural environments and certain religious groups and certain ethnic groups will not and do not take welfare near the rates of urban societies. You know, I don't know if that's just because they're more susceptible or because they've been specifically targeted by Big Brother. Maybe it's a little bit of both, but I don't know. Once you throw that in there, you know, the government approach to helping the stupid people doesn't help the stupid people. Giving someone who is a moron money isn't going to improve their situation because they're a moron. And what are they going to do with the money is they're going to consume it. And they're probably not going to consume it in a good way. So they're probably not going to take it and consume it taking piano lessons, Spanish lessons, and getting job training. They're not going to take it and consume it getting work training. They're not going to get, go to the career center or get a law degree. They're not going to take it going on nice vacations with their kids to Yellowstone and learning about the grandeur of humanity. They are probably going to take the money that they receive, and since they're stupid, they're going to consume all of it, and they're probably going to consume it as booze or cocaine or hookers or whatever. And so you have taxed everybody in the name of helping the poor, and all you've done is feed their very high time preference addictions. You haven't really helped them. You've thrown money at it, and that's also the easy way out. As the author of The Tragedy of American Compassion points out, compassion used to have a more specific meaning. If you are walking down the street and a beggar asks you for money and you just throw money at them, unless you yourself are nearly bankrupt or have no money, that is the easy way out. You are not really engaging in charity in doing that. You're making yourself feel better by, oh, I helped that person because I just threw out some money. You probably didn't help that person. Probably didn't. Not impossible, but you probably didn't. To really be compassionate, you have to basically spend a lot of time with a person. You have to experience their suffering, whatever the suffering may be. And it might be a disease, it might be alcoholism, it might be physical trauma, it might be mental trauma. You actually have to experience that yourself. And I'm not speaking from personal experience very much. I'm speaking from his writings about it. I forget what the author is. Mark Orlansky, maybe? The book is Tragedy of American Compassion. That's what compassion is. And that is almost a prerequisite for making intelligent charity, because until you know what someone's problems are, just giving them something, you don't even know if that something, and it could, even if the something is money, is going to help them. If somebody is overweight and fat, giving them food stamps, hardly that useful to them. If they have a gambling problem and you give them money, or they have an intemperance problem and you give them money. Money is bad in the sense that if you have high time preference, it's the most liquid asset. Just think about it like that. If people have high time preference and you give them the most liquid asset, then they're just going to burn it. It's literally like throwing gasoline on a fireplace. Whereas if you go to them and say, listen, I will not give you money, but if you need a place to stay, I will give you a room if you mow my lawn. Usually you should try and tie it to something. And it's just the government does not operate in that way. It can't. And so this is not a hypothetical scenario that I find particularly useful in terms of government. Government tends to grow this problem. It tends to make more people stupid because it says you don't have to think, we'll take care of it. It's moral hazard in the extreme. Don't worry about your health care. You shouldn't have to worry about that because we'll take care of it. Well, that person is going to have less mental acuity than they otherwise would. Don't worry about your education. It sounds kind of silly, but people are told you don't even have to think about your education. You don't even have to think about what do you need to know. What knowledge, of all the knowledge in the world, I don't even know how to calculate it. How much knowledge is there in the world? There's so much. And I don't know how much the human brain can take. I don't know if there's a known limit. But it takes time to put it in there. How do you decide what you need to know? Well, with government, it's just like you don't even need to think about it. You go to K-12 and then you go to college. You get a degree in, it doesn't even matter. It's irrelevant. You can get a degree in anything. You don't have to think about it. That just makes more people stupid. Whereas if we didn't have that situation, people are like, what do I need to actually know? What books should I read? What information should I gain? What kind of people do I need to talk to get the information I need to achieve the goals that I've set for myself, whether those are career-oriented or not? There's that problem. Healthcare, obviously. I don't need to worry about my health because I'll have government-guaranteed insurance. I'll have, and this is the case with Obamacare now, they have to accept me even if I have a prior condition, so it's not that as bad It's not so bad if I get a prior condition because I'll still be able to get insurance, although at an exorbitant rate. I don't need to plan for retirement. Social Security will take care of that. None of these things make people smarter. They make people dumber. They make people who otherwise would be able to just go, okay, this is something I need to expend some mental effort on. Now I don't have to. All of that is rolled up. All the things that the government does, the various parts of your lives, your defense. I don't have to worry about, how defensible is my house? What am I going to do if somebody attacks me? I don't even know what kind of guns to have, what kind of shrubs to grow, what kind of locks to have. Should I have a security system? Should I have a dog? Where should I live? Blah, blah, blah. Oh, I'm just going to call 911. A catch-all solution. For all the things government does, all that boils down to is who you're going to vote for. And since you have so little influence over the government, over who gets elected, but even if they do get elected, influence over those who are, and none over the bureaucracy that the politicians kind of float on top of, you're just going to vote for what makes you feel good. You're not going to, and that doesn't take mental effort. Oh, he gave a nice speech. It was rousing. And Democrats and Republicans are the same this way. Now, the Democrats get all roused when they see social justice, as they define it, being, oh, he's black, he talks about the poor, man, I love him. It just makes me feel good. Don't even have to look at his policies. Republicans, they get emotional too, but for different reasons. Oh, he's tough. He believes in the greatness of America. He's going to get our enemies. Yeah. And they vote for him, and so they don't have to think about, like, should I have a 401k? Should I have gold and silver? Should I have bitcoins? Should I have some in my pillowcase? How much should be in my pillowcase versus buried at the beach? Blah, blah, blah. It's just, it saves them all this mental effort, but it's not really saving it. It's not like we're deferring to an omniscient, benevolent computer that's making great choices for us all. We're deferring to hopelessly flawed, terribly incentivized human bureaucracy that is much more interested in its own aggrandizement, its own self-interest, and that doesn't even have any particular knowledge about any individual person. So the government doesn't, they have a number, they have your social security number, but there's no element of the government that's looking at you and like, how are we going to best meet the needs of this person? All the things the government does for people, how are we gonna tailor our services to best suit theirs? It's not going to do that. And if you think they are, then you're not going to do it either, which means nobody's going to do it, which means the provision of those services are not going to match your needs really at all. And your life is not going to be as good as it otherwise would be, which is a shame for you, and it's a shame for everyone else who has to deal with that fact that you're living a life that's inferior to what otherwise would be. So, and this ignores, even without going too tangential, that public schools make people stupid. And that's, I kind of alluded to it a little bit, but even if we had great, even if we had a free market in public schools, there would be people who would be morons, but it wouldn't be a justification for the government to run all of our lives, or even to run part of our lives in the name of that tiny percentage. So, all right, that's pretty much it. Yeah, 43 minutes later.